The guest that I'm sat with today, a gentleman by the name of Ian Smith, a very successful executive in the industry. He's conquered the world in England, he's conquered the world in Europe, and he's now moved across to the sports agency side, where he's working as the managing director of commercial development at Relevant Sports Group. Ian, thanks for joining.
Pleasure. Thanks, Samir. Really good to be here. Looking forward to the chat. And
Good stuff.
Thanks for the big build-up. Now I've got to live up to it.
Done that part for you, mate. So place always loves to start these conversations in. Take us back to the start. How did you first break into the industry?
Okay, so I was working as a lawyer in London at one of the big city law firms, Dentons, who at the time were the EPL's lawyers, so the original group who worked on the EPL work and plenty of other sport as well. And when I joined, that was an area I really wanted to get into. So I was working at Dentons. That was a point where the team group left and joined DLA and worked there moved there. I didn't move there, but was looking at that point really to move on from law firm work, because I looked around my peers but also up above me, and there are a lot of intelligent people, a lot of really good people, but no one I really aspired to be. No one I really thought, okay, that's where I'm aiming for. So off the back of that, looked around, and opportunity came up at Team for a junior lawyer to join them. At that point, I'll be honest, I hadn't heard of Team, but I had heard of the Champions League. So when I realised that's what they worked on, put the application in, was lucky enough to get an interview and eventually got offered the role. So that took about 3 or 4 months of time waiting. And off the back of that, moved out to Switzerland and really jumped into the sports industry. Lucky enough to start at a really good place, which I think the team is.
And talk to us about that that first kind of transition, that first taste of sports. Was it as you expected walking in from day one? There was everything that you were kind of going through at the time, right? Moving across from the UK to Switzerland, new country. I know that obviously speak English there, but it's certainly not the first language for the locals. So just talk to us about that kind of whole transition, both from a personal perspective as well as having that first flavour of what working in sports is like.
Yeah, I think on a personal level, as you know, I'm not originally from London, so I'd kind of already. I mean, it is a different country to where I was from, because I'm from the north of England.
Quite literally.
So I'd already made the move there. One relatively big move. I'd lived in Hong Kong for a year when I was actually working at Denton, so I'd already got a bit of experience of living as an expat. Always loved my skiing, and so when the opportunity to move to Switzerland sort of came up, combined it with football, I was really excited about it. It wasn't something I was kind of nervous about. And I think when you go out there with like a positive attitude, you're determined to make it work. So it does. And then to credit Team, they're an international company in a small Swiss town. They were used to people coming over and having to settle in, and they really helped you do that. So yeah, where the language would have been a bit tricky, so sorting out things like bank accounts, all that sort of stuff, they helped you with it and really set it all up to give you the best platform you could have. So right. Combination of a good attitude and joining a really good company, I got a good start on the kind of personal level. And then on a kind of professional level, the team at that point, I think were, maybe still are kind of market leading in terms of what they did. Certainly the Champions League is still one of the major sports properties in the world. And at that point, it was a really exciting time to join. There was it's 2006, so it was when I guess the media industry was really transitioning from free to pay in a really big way. Because I think in the UK, you kind of have this perception because of Sky that everywhere works the same, but Sky is a big market leader in how they've done things, and a bit like the Premier League kind of got in ahead of a lot of others. So the pay subscription model, well, they've been in place for a long time in the UK, it was still growing in the rest of, especially Europe and to some extent the rest of the world. So good time to join and see how the transition from free to pay was moving. And I'll be honest, I never even thought I'd go down the commercial sport route. I thought if I got into sport, it would be on the regulatory side or the agent side, or it really sort of always surprised me that the commercial part of it, and particularly media, was the bit that really kind of stuck and created interest for me. But you never can tell until you try.
There's one point that you spoke about there that I just want to dive into in a little more detail for everyone else's reference, I guess, because you and I have obviously known each other for a couple of years now, Ian, and sitting down, we joked and had a laugh about this a few weeks back of different areas across England, and I think we were actually talking about my girlfriend at the time and how she's made her transition over to New York here. But just talk to us about, I guess, the town that you're from. Give the listeners a bit of a kind of insight as to what it was like kind of growing up there, because there's a couple of things that I think people can really benefit and take from this once we get to that point.
Sure. So I'm from Scunthorpe, which is a northern industrial town. So on that belt where you start at Hull on the east coast, you finish at Liverpool on the west coast, and it's beyond the big cities like Sheffield, Leeds, and Manchester and Liverpool. It's a lot of small, medium-sized industrial towns, so centered around steelworks, which was Scunthorpe, or mines, or So at the point I was growing up, but I had a great childhood and really enjoyed it, but from the area's perspective, it was a pretty down time. The mines were closing. The steelworks went from 22,000 men employed when I was born to, I think by the time I left Scunthorpe, was 5,000 people employed there.
Wow.
So there was, the town itself was struggling, but I'd still say, happy to grow up there. But in terms of opportunities and what you saw around you, really the concept of the commercial world of sport was something I just wasn't even present in my day-to-day life or anyone's day-to-day life in the area.
Yeah.
And sport was something I loved and played, and really Scunthorpe it was a big center of my universe and still is to some degree. But it was, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the most commercially aware town or upbringing that I had. And that's what I said before, it was kind of always a surprise to me when I then did get into the commercial side and find that was an area that I really enjoyed and maybe had a bit of an aptitude for as well.
And just to kind of put that into perspective, so as you know, recruitment, you speak to a lot of people every day, right? I speak to people in the New York market now. I've been over there for 2 years. I speak to people in the New York market that struggle to break into sports and entertainment. Prior to this, I was in London for the prior portion of my life, but specifically working in search in sports for another couple of years. And in London, people find it challenging to break into sports. Yeah. So that kind of perspective and that idea of, a lad from Scunthorpe, for the Americans that don't understand where Scunthorpe is on a map, go and have a look. You'll find it to Ian's definition.
It's like Wrexham without the really famous owners.
There you go. There's your comparison. But to come out of that area, where, to your point, employment was on the decline, and this isn't even touching sports, this is, employment in general, and to come out of that market, to land a job with the organization behind the UEFA Champions League, and kind of working your way up through the ranks. That obviously would have taken not just a click of a button and applying to a job online, right? But a lot of time, a lot of commitment, a lot of dedication. Just kind of give the listeners that may be in a slightly similar situation where they feel like they're struggling to break into the industry, they're finding it challenging to come out of where they're from and make it in an industry like this.
Yeah, actually, sure. So I guess it starts with, the decision on my part to accept that the town I grew up in, with family and friends all there, wasn't the place I was going to build my life or my career, and a decision, an active decision to want to move away, and understanding that, and understanding that I did pretty well in school, took the opportunity to go to university. So I took a little step south. I know to you it's not the south, but Leicester. So yeah, I moved a little bit south, and chose to do a law degree there. At that point, I wouldn't say I was convinced I wanted to be a lawyer, and maybe we get onto that because maybe we talk about how I transition across. But I knew it was a good degree to have, whatever you do. So followed that route, and then halfway through the university course in the second year, people were applying for summer placement roles. I don't know if they still exist at law firms in London. By then I decided I'd like to try and get into a role in London, and talking to a few friends, they applied. So I thought, okay, I'll take the opportunity, and started looking at all these prospectuses for law firms that I'd never heard of before, which is, I'm sure to some of my former colleagues, is a bit shocking, but yeah, I hadn't heard of a single one of them. And as I looked through, I was like, okay, there's a lot of variety. How do I pick my way through this? And saw that some of them, not many at that point, but some of them professed to have sports practices. So I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to be a lawyer, I should do it in an area that I'm interested in. You know, I should try to pick a topic, and sport is something I've always loved. So picked out all of the law firms that had any kind of a sports practice, sent off applications to them, a few others as well, just because I wasn't sure. You know, I appreciate sport as an area lots of people want to get into, so I didn't anticipate I'd necessarily get one. So I put a few other applications in as well, and then was just fortunate enough to get. I got 3, I think, out of about 20 applications. So I had to got the 3. One of them was Denton's, and that was the one that I just as soon as I got there, I was like, okay, I could probably quite enjoy this if I can get into the sports department. Because as you know, even when you get into the law firm, you don't necessarily get into the sports department.
Yeah.
So I got the role at Denton's, but then you have again, it's another kind of, frankly, you just put the graft in to make sure that when you apply to go in that role, you're attractive to them, and you've got half a chance of being given the opportunity. So when I was at Denton's, managed to do a sports seat with the guys who did the Premier League work, and that was that really gave me the hunger to say, okay, this is a taste of it as a trainee. I really want to see if I can get into this. So I actually signed up and did a postgraduate course in sports law. It was called then. It was at King's College. I think it still runs. But it was John Taylor, who was at Bird and Bird and previously Townley's, who he ran that. And really off the back of that was where I started to think, okay, if I am staying in law, because as I said, I wasn't necessarily looking around me thinking I want to be any of these people. Not because they were on the negative side, just because I could see I wouldn't necessarily want to do what they were doing.
Yeah.
I did that, and I thought, yeah, actually, quite a surprise, but I really enjoyed the broadcast law aspect of it, the sponsorship part, understanding how the machine works really, and understand that if you build a machine, somebody has to pay for it.
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
generally looked at it and I thought, okay, yeah, I'd like to see if I can get into this. And then I suppose about 6 months after that course, the opportunity at the team came up. So it was kind of the first commercial legal role in sport I'd seen advertised for junior lawyers, and it was actually the first time they'd recruited a junior lawyer, and that's how I made that step into teams. So I suppose short version of it, a lot of graft, and a bit of clear-headed thinking every now and again about really where did I want to go, and not just being satisfied that once I got what was a really good job in a really good law firm, that was enough, but recognizing that you're in a job where you're working for a very long time. Don't just sit there and accept it and make it a grind. If you can get into an area you're interested in, do that, because there's always bits that are a grind, but I'll be honest, day to day, most of what I do, I really enjoy.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, and that's really, really insightful. I hear that a lot, that the best people that I speak to, that I work with, that I know are successful, they're very rarely settled. Even if they're in a job that they're completely happy in, they're in an organization they're happy in, they're in a role that they're happy in, they're always trying to push themselves and always trying to think about what's next. And I think that's quite an important part when people think about career progress, and how they develop themselves as an individual outside of what an employer will do to you to develop you. I think it's really, really important that people have that thought process in mind, that they're thinking about what is next, how do I get there, what are the steps that I'm going to take today to be a general counsel or a chief legal officer in 15, 20, 25 years. And what's the experience that I need to pick up to do that, and what are the initiatives that I can take today to try and get there. So I think that's really interesting. You were at Team, you've worked at Sport 5, you talk to us about the Catalyst Media Group then, because I guess that's a slightly different environment than the prior two organizations, and we'll come on to the big one after.
Okay, so yes, the Team was, as I said, I mean, in terms of a place to learn about the sports industry, Team was fantastic. And I'd done 2 sales cycles with them there on the legal side, primarily doing the media rights contracts, and done some amazing stuff. But at that point, and to go to your point there, was thinking about, okay, this is amazing, but it's not what I don't want to just do this forever. I mean, I think it was not possible to do that forever, but I wasn't settled. I wanted to try and do a bit more, and the opportunity came at the Sport 5 to have a team under me for the first time. So, took the opportunity, and then really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then Catalyst was, like you say, it was a different thing. It was a couple of my ex-bosses from team who left team and they'd set up Catalyst to work with actually Relevant Sports, who I'm now back working again with, who were running the International Champions Cup, so the summer friendly, we'll call it tournament, summer friendly tournament that ran from 2014, used to bring all the big clubs across to the US, and then Catalyst was built to basically do that, but across in Asia. So working with Relevant, but rather than taking the teams to the US, we would take them to Asia, put games on. We put games on in Singapore, Australia, China, Hong Kong, and so and sell the media rights globally. So build a proper media rights platform for the broadcasters who, in the summer, typically they have to run around picking up the friendly matches from all the different promoters, whereas we could bundle it and say, here we go, we've got 27 matches. Here's your summer calendar, done. So from a buyer's point of view, I think it was a good property. And we managed to build that from the global media rights platform from next to nothing to a pretty strong property. Actually, did well financially. And the interesting part was you go from Team and Sportify, which are in our industry at least pretty solid companies with solid property background, the whole thing, and Catalyst was far more risky. You know, from year to year, if we didn't get the right clubs in the tournament, you might not have a tournament, or you might not have teams in Asia. So it was a pretty significant risk. I'd say my wife wasn't overly delighted that I took that leap, but I just wanted to try something with a bit more entrepreneurial, a bit more adventure around it in terms of what you do and what you could do. Because much as Champions League is fantastic, there are naturally restrictions about how far you can try things and what you can do. So just a silly example, but instead of a coin toss for a banking partner when we had a match in Singapore, we did a credit card toss instead. Now that is, it's anathema to someone like you. You're not going to toss a coin. You've got to do that. So
yeah,
it's just things like that, the chance to do things a little bit differently.
yeah.
And without a safety net. And I think back to your point there are times in your career where you do need to take a little bit of a risk. And on a personal level, what it did was allow me to really step into doing more than the legal aspect of the role. In a small company at a sort of a senior level as I was at that point, you really do have to sort of roll your arms up, and you can't pass it and say, oh, this is for the COO, and this is because there's not that many of you. You need to actually roll your sleeves up and do it.
Yeah.
And it gave me that first real chance to do a bit more than purely the legal work. And I had been looking for that a little bit. I'd realised that, and I think a lot of lawyers who go in-house generally are this way inclined anyway. You're generally interested in how the business works, and the industry you works in, as opposed to purely the legal aspects of what you're doing. And then I think it's quite a natural progression then to, once you understand a business and an industry, how they work, wanting to branch out and do a bit more than, I keep calling it just the legal work, it's really important, but doing a defined legal role and getting into the other areas, more the commercial side, more the operational side, and Catalyst gave me the chance to do that.
I think there's certainly a lot of points to take from what you just said, but one thing that really stands out is going into sometimes an organization that isn't maybe, sunshines and daisies every day. You've got to grind, you've got to kind of get through it. And to your point, you find yourself wearing multiple hats. But what does that all give you? It just gives you such broader experience of how an organization is actually ran versus just your vertical and, the part that you play in a business versus the wider scope of the actual organization. Being involved in some of those conversations gives you so much more experience. Being involved in the strategy gives you so much more experience, and that naturally then shapes good leaders. When people have got that experience, it isn't solely in line with what they've always known and done. So you're there for 4 years. You've obviously, you've run. Sounds like at least you were running a few different kind of areas of the organisation there, and picked up a lot more experience. FIFA come knocking. Talk to us about that, because any young guy, girl growing up that's got a passion for football or soccer, FIFA is really the behemoth in the industry that people want to aspire to get to, and the one name that everyone probably globally recognizes. they come knocking
Yeah.
at the door. How did that feel?
It felt pretty good. At that point, so with Catalyst, we'd been bidding for the commercial mandate from the AFC, so the Asian equivalent of UEFA. And we'd actually won it, but I'd already decided at that point I didn't want to move to Asia. Like I said before, I'd lived in Hong Kong before. Didn't want to move the family out there. And to be absolutely blunt, everyone needs a bit of this in their career. I got a bit of luck. So 2 weeks after I basically told the guys I wasn't going to move out to Asia, the FIFA role came up. And it wasn't something I'd known was there before. It was like you say, in every career, you need that bit of luck. And that was one of mine. And it was interesting because at that point, I decided I wasn't going to look for legal roles. I was going to take the job opportunities to try and, move out of the legal area and into a more commercial role. But as you say, when FIFA come knocking and the role was to lead all of the legal side and the commercial, the event delivery. So everything, if you like, non-sporting, that was the role that I was being talked to for. And yeah, you can't turn it down really. It's pretty straight. Like you just laid it out. When it's FIFA and it's football and that's the industry you're in, whatever you hear or have heard about FIFA in the past or now, or it's the World Cup. It's the biggest sports tournament in the world. I mean, okay, maybe Olympics is there as well, but just in terms of me personally, as a massive football fan, it's the biggest thing there is. So yeah, then to FIFA and to have the opportunity to basically use all the skills I've built up over the previous 15 years was also really exciting because, to lead not just the media part, not just the sponsorship part, not just the event part, but oversee all of that. And having had the experience at Catalyst where I had touched on all these areas, and in a way that was a bit beyond the legal side, it also gave me the confidence to do it because I think you can't go into these roles thinking, no one's thinking I'm going to ace this, but you have to go in there with a bit of a feeling of, yeah, I can do this. Because if you don't, I think you drown pretty quickly. And it was a pretty big team. It was 25 people overall. And of any aspect of the role, that was the one that I thought most deeply about before because it's the piece I hadn't really done. I'd had a team of sport 5 of 4, but 25 and 4 is a pretty different animal. And that's actually the bit that I really, really enjoyed at FIFA is the team. I inherited a group of very cool people and added what I think were even more very good people. So really, really enjoyed that part of it. Really enjoyed it.
I mean, we're quite literally talking the World Cup of sports when you talk about FIFA, right? And
yeah.
To your point there of people around you, I can imagine there would have been so many, maybe those that reported directly into you that were in your department, but so many people within that organization that you can learn from outside of, commercial work, operational legal. It's a place that has so many talented individuals. I know a lot of them. I know a lot of people that have worked there over the years. But that must have been quite refreshing being in that environment where you can just learn from, pretty much everyone around you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you should never stop trying to learn. You should always be, I think, hunting for something to learn and improve your knowledge on. But yeah, for a little while, I actually shared an office with the director of medical, and at that point he was going through the process of studying the impact of heading on footballers. He'd actually been a centre back himself, so
he knows all about it.
he knows all about it. So it was just fascinating to hear what he was doing because, to a degree, it touches what I did, but not really. But it's within that world of football, and in the end, everything touches everything else. So to understand that, the money that we were bringing in to fund FIFA and to fund the federations actually goes towards something like this study on concussion, kind of world leading study on the impact of heading the ball in football. That was really interesting. Like I said, it didn't really touch my day to day, but just to listen to it and learn about it was fascinating. And there were plenty of other examples like that. The political side of football. How does it really work? That was fascinating. Just an area I've never touched on before. I'm definitely not a political character, so to see how that works, that was a learning experience as well. As you say, there's so many different people and types of people at FIFA. It's definitely somewhere you can really learn a lot from.
And Relevant Sports, the opportunity that knowing you and knowing the role that you're currently in as the managing director of international development, business development, sorry, that pretty much shapes everything that you've done in your career and puts it into one role with the added layer of something that you've always kind of wanted to do and always been intentionally trying to find opportunities in. Just talk to us about that, because you've been there for a year now, right? And I see salespeople breaking into the industry from so many different types of backgrounds and experiences. Legal is a really interesting one for me because you speak to a lot of legal people that, you'll know this, you're working on contracts all the time, you're involved in these big partnership agreements, you're effectively working very closely with the entire sales team, the marketing team, partnerships team on creating these contracts and creating these agreements. So everything there is to know behind the closed doors about the sales life cycle and what it takes to be a good salesperson. So just talk to us about that a little, and I guess how your experience in the legal world has actually helped shape you as now a business development executive in the industry.
So yeah, it's an interesting one because I think sales, I watched a really excellent sales team at Team Marketing, watched how they operated, and there's a human aspect to everything that they do, very much so. But there's also a really there's a very logical, very structured approach that they used to take. And looking at that and learning from that was, from a legal perspective, you use the skill set you've got. It's not legal, but you use the skill sets you've built up, which is, applying the logic to how you negotiate a contract. You apply that to how you might try and negotiate a sale. That side of things, I think I found increasingly interesting and just basically wanted to go at. And then it's about finding the right opportunity to do that. But then what you can add in with more experience is an understanding not just of how a sale operates, but how the whole environment operates. And where I've really enjoyed with the move across onto the relevant side is actually the acquisition side of things. So we recently secured a mandate with EFL for the Americas for all of their matches. So 1,700 matches, including Wrexham, for those who maybe don't know what the EFL is. But it's the three divisions that sit below the Premier League in England. It's a cup competition which also includes Premier League teams, and it's it's kind of, for me, it goes right back home because it's the league that Scunthorpe used to play in before they were relegated out into non-existence, pretty much, which hurts every day. And yeah, Paul Mullin did score against us to relegate us from the conference.
Wrexham fans loving this part.
Killing me. I think I'm one of the only people in the world that doesn't like Wrexham. I'm bitter about it because why did they?
Always been more of a Ted Lasso guy myself, which isn't quite comparable, but yeah.
So I think the experience from throughout the career builds up to the point where you're quite confident that you can have a go at aspects beyond the area you trained in. Because I know there's people from finance that have moved across into the sales side as well. And then it's just the belief you can do it and a desire to do it. And then it's the opportunity. And I think there's, you said yourself, lawyers come into sales at different points in career. There's some who go in very quickly. They do a couple of years as a lawyer and went, Jesus, no, not for me. I'm going to do something else. And they go straight into being a sales guy. There's people who get sort of more midway through, early 30s, mid 30s. And then, are in a good place, well liked, and given, asked, would you like the opportunity to do this? In my case, Danny Silverman, who's the CEO of Relevant, came across and just said, look, I'd worked with them on the Champions League acquisition and the sale to CBS. That had gone really well. So I'd known Danny before I joined FIFA. And when I left FIFA, Danny asked me to go and work with him on that. And after that, I went in and we started talking. And we thought that the international business development role would work because I know the industry in such detail now, particularly football, and the contact base that you, especially from FIFA, you build up pretty quickly. I think I was in the right place to have a go at the business development side. And then the sales side. So yeah, that's probably the part that I'm enjoying the most because it's the bit I know the least or have done the least, let's say. But it's going pretty well so far.
Great. The one of the things I'd love to dive into today that you and I have kind of touched on over the years really is, and this is obviously now an area that you've been able to really get involved in from a sales perspective, but I guess the world of rights holders securing revenue of all lines of business, but really kind of diving into the sports broadcasting landscape, how much that sector, if you like, within the industry has changed over the past, 10, 15, 20 years, the way that fans and consumers now take on or consume sports broadcasting is changing, and it has been changing, and it will continue to change. I guess in the seat that you're sat in, Ian, and maybe just kind of before we dive into things into too much detail, if you can just provide us with a kind of general overview of the current state of sports broadcasting rights and the various kind of primary sources of revenue when it comes to rights holders.
Yeah, I mean the primary source of revenue for rights holders still is media rights. I mean, there is a lot of noise in the industry about the genuine difficulty and change in the nature of the media rights industry at the moment, and it is real. And maybe we'll go on to talk about that a little bit. But in real terms, the majority of the revenue in the sports industry continues to come from media rights. And I think that is not necessarily going to change. I think it will potentially not be as lucrative as it has been for a good 20 years. I think securing the rights fees will be more difficult, and I think people are going to have to be a lot more targeted and intelligent about how they go about doing it. But I do think media rights revenue is going to remain a big part of sport. I think where the industry is right now. So if you wind it back, let me go back 15 years, I guess. So you kind of have the point where a lot of sport was, to the extent it was broadcast, was being broadcast free to air, and the Skies of the world and Canal Pluses were really building into those markets and building properties as a result of that. I mean, there was a Premier League was a forerunner of all of that, and it continues to be. So you had that kind of initial transition where the rights fees really jumped, and that was the first time they really jumped, when you have that transition from free broadcasters to pay. And then I sort of witnessed that team. Actually, and it was still one of the biggest deals I think I worked on, was the transition from a mix of free and pay, where you're trying to get a little bit of pay to give your sponsors the exposure, where media rights revenue became so much and such a focus that you could risk the sponsor money to a degree, because the money you were getting from media rights was so significant. And that was the transition where even Champions League went all pay in the UK. So I worked on the BT Sport deal, where that was the first time that the Champions League in the UK had not been on free to air in some way. ITV had always retained a first big match on a Tuesday or Wednesday, and there'd been highlights and whatever else, but saw that transition from free to all pay. And then you think, okay, well, that's that big jump. How many more big jumps can there be? And then the next thing that you saw witness with the industry was the paid broadcasters like Canal Plus, like Sky, then being challenged by telcos. So the telcos came in, and BT is the perfect example of that, but in other territories as well, telcos came in and challenged the mainstream pay subscription model, or the broadcasters who that was their model, and the telcos, they were using, in many cases, they were using the sport as a way of bringing in subscribers, not just for for their sports channels, but also the bundle of the internet, the telephony, everything in one group. So that was another big leap to create this ever increasing cycle of revenue that's just been moving this way for 10, 15 years. And I think we're now at the point where, for the first time, it's clear that the traditional pay subscription model, and maybe exclude the UK a little bit because Sky is a very special case, but the traditional pay subscription model, the bundle approach, certainly in the US, the cable bundle, that clearly isn't working anymore the way it did. And therefore the revenues aren't there in the same way they were for all sports, because there are certain certain sports, certain competitions that continue to do extraordinarily well. And that's partly the pressure that is on all of the media broadcasters, media companies, to make sure they have that content that's absolutely must have. So NFL still going crazy in the numbers. I'm sure NBA is still going to go absolutely crazy in the numbers. EPL still does extremely well. Champions League still does extremely well. Other properties, it's getting harder and harder for them to generate anything like the revenues that they have done historically. You know, we've had these kind of 3 big leaps in revenues and continue on. I suppose if people were being honest, they would have known it couldn't last forever. But over such a long period, I think it's come as quite a shock, and because we're literally in the middle of it, coming as quite a shock to a lot of rights holders, just that the number doesn't always go up. Sometimes it may go down.
And what would you put that down to? Me specific, you make a really good point about the US. The way that fans, consumers, spectate sports in the US market is the biggest challenge, in my opinion, at least, is you've got Fubo TV, you've got ESPN, you've got YouTube TV, you've got Apple TV, you've got, 10, 20, 30 different broadcasters, streaming platforms, however you want to categorize them, media businesses that all retain different rights to different industries, to different sports, to men's versus women's. So for any US citizen that wants to watch a random game somewhere because they're a soccer fan or a basketball fan, the way that they are going to be able to watch that game is going to be really, really challenging for them unless they effectively have a subscription with all of these platforms, which just isn't realistic for anyone, right? So is that the reason that you kind of put it down to, or would you say that there's anything else that people maybe haven't been thinking about, to your point, and it's now kind of hit them with a bit of a shock?
Well, I think it's so the money that's been coming in, the heavy hitting revenue that's been coming in has been coming in from the likes of ESPN and the more traditional media companies. And what I mentioned before about the bundle not really working anymore. So the old cable bundle, that wasn't working anymore, or doesn't work as well anymore. It still works to some degree, but this wasn't working as well, wasn't bringing in the revenue, because with the developments in technology and streaming, there were opportunities to get around the bundle that were challenging, and the media companies could see it coming, and they could see there was a challenge coming to their model. And people that, I think it's probably about 5 years ago, were really quite excited by the prospect and the possibility, not having to have 200 channels of which you watched 3 or 5 or however many it might be, and then pay for a bunch of others that you had no interest in. For the first time, you could buy what you actually wanted. That was the theory. I think a bit what's happened is, the media companies, they've all built their own streaming platforms, because in the end, the media companies, frankly, are the best at knowing how to satisfy the consumer, generally speaking. So they've all built their own streaming platforms. And then you get this fragmentation of properties, because they're looking, the rights holders are looking always for more money. They're looking for more ways to generate that. And one way they've found to do that is by, and I'm part of the problem in that sense, is selling to multiple parties, multiple packages. And that enables you to then generate those greater revenues. The result for the consumer, especially in the US, I've seen this, is that you finding the sport you want to watch is very hard. And if, to your point about, you can't have everything, because that would, well, you can, but you'd have to be really quite wealthy to do it, because it's so many subscriptions you would need. And it's possible that the solution going forward is reaggregation. So you've got the likes of Rocky already, who are aggregating all of these different platforms onto their platform and providing a part solution to the problem you're talking about, is you have to go to loads of different places. So although the old cable bundle stops kind of being so attractive to consumers, you're actually potentially going in a bit of not a full circle, but you're creating the same thing again, where the aggregation is taking place, but it's taking place on a platform rather than via cable.
There's a funny story. There's a funny story that you just reminded me of there. I was watching a Liverpool game maybe 2 or 3 months ago in a bar here in New York, and I'm not going to mention the name of the bar because I don't want anyone to get into trouble here. But they had the stream up on the up on multiple TVs, and the stream was all mirrored from a laptop. And I found it funny when I saw the person that was loading the stream up open up Twitter, or X as it's called now, and type in Liverpool versus I can't even remember who we were playing now. I think it might have been the Arsenal game. Liverpool versus Arsenal, and then load up the streams that are on. Painful for me. Thanks for the reminder. Loaded up the streams and scrolled down and opened a live stream that someone had that someone was running on X. And I just sat there and thought, this is odd. We're in a bar, right? This is, these people can get into trouble for this. And, I asked them, hey, do you guys not have whoever it is, Peacock or Universal or whoever it is that's got the rights to that game?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, this is so much easier. We just load up the stream online. We haven't got to worry about, having 15, 20 different media businesses that we're subscribed to. I just thought, this is not only now disrupting individual homes with piracy, which is obviously one of probably the biggest challenges that media businesses are now facing when it comes to streaming. But it's actually now been extended to bars, and that makes it even harder to measure because you've then got how many people are in the bar at that time, how many people have attended that bar over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Which just kind of makes me think, and I think you're a great person to answer this question. What measures or other measures do you think can be being taken to try and combat the issue of piracy in this world?
It's difficult. Short answer, it's really difficult. So I did work on the kind of the anti-piracy side of things when I was working with team on the Champions League, and even then, and that's a few years ago now, even then it was a significant problem because it was just seemingly, and I don't know how to do this, but seemingly just so easy for them to get hold of the content and put it out there, anywhere, everywhere in the world. And I think that the measures, look, there's two sides to it. There's three. There's the technical side of it, is what measures can you take to protect your signal and to protect your content so that it isn't very easy for anyone to do what you just described. There are clearly some people who make it their goal to get around all these measures, and some do. So that's why you can go online, you can pick up an illegal stream. It's, everyone knows how it's possible, it's there. So there's the technical side of things, which is always that cat and mouse game with the rights holders trying to close it down and chase it down. And I think for periods previously, it was something that they were never going to stamp it out completely, but they could just about keep on top of enough to keep a lid on it. But I think now it is a genuine problem for rights holders. So then you kind of get to the second and third limbs of it, which the second limb is, what do the authorities, the governments do about the damage that's been caused to a really quite significant industry, financially, because it does harm. Ultimately, if you think about the UK, one of the most successful products is the Premier League. One of the most financially lucrative things for the government is the Premier League and the media rights that come in for the Premier League, not just in the UK, but globally, and the tax revenue that comes from that. And the governments, therefore, are starting to become more actively involved in trying to support rights holders. So particularly in Europe, you see in France, you see in the UK, you see in Germany, the laws are changing, they're being tweaked basically to anticipate and make sure that there's some teeth there when you do hunt down whoever's doing that, you're actually able to dissuade them from doing it again in the future.
Yeah. Good luck with that conversation.
And then the last point is kind of around making your product appealing enough so that rather than hunting for it and trying to find it for free, because it's not always direct, it's not so easy to find it for free, but rather than that, make your product good enough and accessible enough that you can actually, yes, there'll be piracy, but on a low level.
Right. It's all about risk mitigation, I guess, rather than
exactly. So minimize that risk, and the things like fast channels as they're coming in. So putting things out yourself intentionally for free. So you put out the highlights for free in the hope that will dissuade people from wanting to go on these pirate channels or watching pirated, and then making your proposition sufficiently attractive that they're willing to pay whatever it might be. And I think it's sport it doesn't, much as it is pretty much my entire world. There are other parts of the world, and if you look back at what happened with music, You know, Napster was an absolute, originally it was an absolute disaster for the music industry, pretty much tore it down. You think about all the big music producers then, how that industry worked with albums, and then if you look at what Apple did, it was basically it was a very, very good, very slick and affordable version of Napster. It was really good, and I think sport doesn't necessarily need to find the same solution, but it certainly needs to understand that the solution can't be just to keep trying to close it all down, because that won't work. There has to be, you know, multiple approaches. There's the government approach, but there's also one that sport needs to think and take itself. And maybe with the greater pressures on revenues for rights holders now, this is maybe the crunch point where people actually will look at how they present their sports properties and how they sell them and how they're made available to the public. And I think things like Roku is interesting. Fast channels is, you know, a really good way of doing that. It's then how do you generate the revenue that you need and want from that?
You make a really good point there.
Yeah.
No, you do make a good point. When rights holders think about new revenue streams, different ways of doing things, right? We're in a world right now where technology is advancing almost faster than we can adapt to. Every other week, there's something new, whether it's VR, whether it's AR. You're hearing new products come out by all the, you know, the major tech businesses, again, nearly every other week. I guess tying those two things together, looking at new revenue streams, looking at the way that technology is developing, what are some of the kind of innovative revenue streams that sports rights holders could maybe be thinking about now, taking the development of technology into account to try and unlock and create some new revenue opportunities, almost to offset the, you know, decline in traditional broadcasting?
Yeah, I think I think AR is interesting because that's developing, and you can see that, you know, that people can they can commercialize AR. That's already been done to some degree. I'm sure it will be developed further as time goes on. I think one really interesting thing and it goes back to my time at FIFA and something FIFA did, is for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, in Brazil, they actually had, through a company called Live Mode, they actually had a deal with Casa TV, so a content creator, you know, and it was on YouTube. And this is a guy he's built his own following, and he's built it via just being a really entertaining guy. Because in the end, you have to appeal to consumer. In the end, it's not no exec decides, you know, what you want to watch. No really anybody other than you as a human, you know, as a consumer, decide how you want to watch stuff and what you like. They can't. So what had happened with this guy? He built up a really huge, significant following already in Brazil, commentating on different matches, and, you know, the Live Mode went and said to him, look, you can have the World Cup. You can legally have the World Cup. You can show the matches. We want you to commentate them. And what they've done that I think is incredibly smart is they've then said, right, and we're going to commercialize the whole environment around it. We're going to sell revenue around the content creator. So rather than trying to force people onto the traditional platforms, there's been an acceptance that, okay, the traditional platforms are still there and the viewing figures are not dead. So there's no point. Sometimes I hear people say TV is dead. In the real sense, it's a screen. So people spend their whole lives on screens. Screens aren't dead at all. So the old pay model isn't absolutely dead, but these other approaches are starting to grow. And I think what Casa TV did with FIFA was probably maybe it's not the first one, but it's certainly the most high profile one that's been done, where a property is actually taken its premium. There is nothing more premium than FIFA World Cup in the world of sport, right? They took their premium property and they put it on a content creator on his channel. And then, yeah, the money comes in, but the money comes in because they've done something that appeals to the consumer. And what appeals is a guy who they like to hear his opinion. They like to hear how he does it, you know? And that's what
I love that. It's funny that I obviously don't have access to Sky anymore, but through Instagram, you know, and social media, you can kind of keep up with, you know, what Sky are up to. And you're seeing very slowly, you're seeing this shift. There's being so much more, that is so much more appealing to the way that fans and people like you and I currently consume media and sports. And whether it's anything from Jamie Carragher, Micah Richards, and Thierry Henry, you know, breaking into
I-
things together, which you never used to see that, right? For rewind
No,
10 years ago and look at the commentary after a game, and there was never that camaraderie. Yes, they'd have a laugh, but the level and extent that it's being driven to now, you can see that it's intentional because you
yeah.
can see that they're having to kind of put themselves
That was
outside
giving
of
me another
the
example of CBS and what they're doing with the Galazzo, and
yeah.
that is exactly the sort of thing that I think is probably the direction all of the sports media companies are going to need to go, which is make your content fun and interesting. And you know, the revenue should follow. The models are going to be slightly different, and how you generate the revenue is going to be different. But yeah, I'm all for watching Mika and the guys have fun,
Yeah, no doubt.
especially at Mika's expense. He's always the butt of it. I don't know why it's him, but it's really...
I feel like Carragher doesn't help himself half the time as well, and it's really painful sometimes watching him as a Liverpool fan. I love the guy; he's a great centre back, but yeah, sometimes he puts himself in tricky situations.
He definitely enjoyed himself on the yellow wall, didn't he?
Right, he did, yeah, he did. I saw the heat map of when he'd had Jadon Sancho in for an interview after, and it was pretty much the entirety of Sancho's right shoulder, which was quite funny to look at. But look, Ian, it's been a pleasure having you on today. I think your personal story is great. I've got a lot of respect for people that you know, make it out of a small city like Scunthorpe and to make it with an organisation like FIFA. There's a lot of really interesting topics that we spoke about today that I think a lot of people can take away from this, and whether that's personal, whether that's professional, very helpful and very insightful. So thank you, and it's been a pleasure having you on as a guest today.
Pleasure being on. Really enjoyed it, and yeah, thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week for another episode.